Vice President of the American Family Association. Jesus commanded Christians to love our enemies. That's why we don't respond in kind to verbal and physical attacks by those with whom we disagree. Instead, we speak the truth in love and need your help to keep doing that. Year-end giving is very important to our ministry. You can give at afa.net. And please pray for our ministry as we continue our efforts. Thank you.
If you look nationally, thousands of people being released into the United States who are asylum seekers, not necessarily worthy of asylum, but claiming that they are, every month.
Illinois has a back-breaking unfunded pension obligation currently at $133.5 billion, and it should grow roughly $3 billion a year. It consumes more than 25% of the state budget.
ICE unexpectedly dropping off hundreds of migrants in downtown El Paso, Texas during the Christmas holiday.
We have an agreement for them to notify an NGO, the Annunciation House, beforehand. The glitch occurred on Sunday evening when they released them without telling us.
Freedom prospers when religion is vibrant and the rule of law under God is acknowledged.
An informed patriot is what we want.
Welcome to American Family Radio's Focal Point, the home of muscular Christianity on conservative talk radio.
Muscular Christianity.
Where we relentlessly explore the intersection of truth and politics.
The trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant. It's just that they know so much that isn't so.
Now, here's your host, Brian Fisher.
Welcome to Focal Point on American Family Radio. This Friday edition of Focal Point, guest hosting for you today. My name is Walker Wildmon. Glad to be with you, sitting in for Brian this Friday. Brian will be back in the captain's chair next week after the new year break. But today you have me, and it's Friday. We're going to cover a lot of news, a lot of content. Got a funny story for you that we'll cover at the top of the show here. You're going to get a kick out of this. But before we jump into the news and some of the stuff that's going on across the country, I want to turn our attention to God's Word. Let's look in Matthew chapter 11. Matthew chapter 11. And the Matthew chapter 11 begins with a talking about John the Baptist and talking about how he prepared the way for Jesus, for Jesus' ministry on earth. But let's look down to the latter half of Matthew chapter 11, and there you have Jesus talking about what to do with our burdens, what to do with the weight and the sin on our shoulders. Jesus says, Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, well-known passage here, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." So whatever we're facing today, whatever sin, whatever struggle, whatever trial, whatever difficulty, we need to lay the struggles that we have at the foot of the cross and allow Christ Jesus to take our burdens from us, lift our burdens, pull us, draw us away from sin, draw us into His presence so we can honor God with our lives and honor God with our actions. Jumping right into this news story that I wanted to bring up today, I mean, this is absolutely hilarious. You're going to get a kick out of this. There's this news story out about this kid who's doing his homework, and his mom keeps hearing the son's talking. He's supposed to be doing his homework in the kitchen, and he keeps talking what appears to be to himself. And so the mom kind of keeps walking by the kitchen door, peeking in, trying to see what is my son doing, talking to himself when he's supposed to be doing his math homework. and I'm just going to let you listen to this, and then I'll explain it after. This is clip 2. Let's listen.
Alexa, what 5 minus 3?
5 minus 3 equals 2.
Boy!
So there you, Jeff, that's if you didn't understand that clip, the audio is not very good. But what's going on here is this kid who looks to be about 7 or 8, maybe he's in 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade. He's sitting at the kitchen table, Amazon Alexa, the little machine, is in the corner of the kitchen, and the kid says, "Hey Alexa, what is 5 minus 3?" And then Alexa says, 5 minus 3 is 2. And then he writes down the answer on his homework. So anyways, and then the latter end of that clip, you hear the mom who's saying, "Boy," and she's probably about to wear his bottom out because he's cheating on his homework. Let's play that one more time now that you know the context. Okay. Let's listen.
Alexa, what 5 minus 3?
5 minus 3 equals 2.
Boy!
I got to give it to the kid. That is brilliant. You know, so for the kid to think that I can just ask this computer over here what the answer to my homework is, that is absolutely brilliant. I know, Jeff, you use Google Home,
Google
right?
Home, yes.
And these machines can they query the internet for the answers, but they can basically answer most anything.
Yes, it depends on how you phrase it, but obviously he was asking the right question.
Yeah, he must have seen his mom in the kitchen asking Alexa questions.
Oh yeah, I give him. You got to give him kudos for that.
Yeah, I mean that I know he shouldn't be cheating on his homework. I'm not encouraging that, but that's brilliant. I mean, it's basically like using a calculator. I mean, we all use calculators, and so this kid says, "I'm just going to use Alexa to do my homework." That is absolutely hilarious. So parents, if you hear your kids talking to themselves in their bedroom or elsewhere, they're probably asking a computer the answer to their homework questions, so we better keep an eye on that. You know, at 1:20, in about 9 minutes, we're going to have Dan Celia on, host of Financial Issues on American Family Radio, and of course, president of Financial Issues Ministries. And I want to ask Dan a couple questions. We're going to talk about why on earth the Federal Reserve raised the interest rates couple weeks ago when they just raised them a few months ago. Why on earth is the Fed still raising interest rates when our economy is doing very well? And also we'll talk to Dan about, you know, how much longer can the federal government continue to print and borrow money, you know, without apparent consequence? We'll ask those two questions to Dan. He knows much more about the stock market, much more about money than I do, so we're just going to ask the expert his opinion on that. But until then, we're going to talk about, you know, this whole issue of illegal immigration. You know, President Trump saying today, we're not opening the government. We're not going to open the government until something is done about the border, about illegal immigration. And I just got to give kudos to President Trump for fighting on this. I think he needs to leave the government shut down until he gets the border wall funding, plain and simple. He needs to leave the government shut down until he gets border wall funding. You know, Nancy Pelosi's, while all this is going on, President Trump canceled his trip to Mar-a-Lago to Florida. Wise decision there. But Nancy Pelosi, she's not wasting any time. She's in Hawaii. Nancy Pelosi is at a resort. And guess what the minimum stay is at the resort? $900 a night. $900 a night for a minimum stay at this resort in Hawaii. $5,000 for the presidential suite. I would not be surprised if Nancy Pelosi is staying in the presidential suite. Nonetheless, Democrats out vacationing, spending big money when thousands of federal employees are out of work, and President Trump's in Washington, and illegal immigrants continue to pour into our border. Democrats have no shame about this. They are out happy and merry while our border is wide open. Drugs, cartels, illegal immigration pour in to our country. And, you know, along the same lines here, while the Democrats are vacationing, and some of the Republicans are also on vacation, this happened in California in recent days. On Wednesday, actually, 2 days ago. And this is a very sad story. This is reading directly from the news story from thehill.com. A man suspected of fatally shooting a California police officer on Wednesday is in the United States illegally, the sheriff office says. The Associated Press reports that this county sheriff, Adam Christensen, told reporters on Thursday that his deputies have identified a suspect in the shooting of this officer, 33-year-old young officer, but are not yet releasing the identity of the illegal immigrant. So, this is going on in California, which is a sanctuary state, and they protect thugs, they protect criminals, they protect illegal immigrants. This is California, and one of the illegal immigrants that California is protecting goes and slaughters a man in uniform, a police officer in uniform, slaughters the officer, and he's still on the loose. We don't know where he is. The illegal immigrant murderer is still on the loose, and we don't know where he is. It would be great if we had a border wall and a secure border so that this thug could be deported and not come back. But instead, the Democrats won't open borders, and in return, Americans are dying every day in our streets, whether it be drug overdoses, drug cartel violence, MS-13. You have this illegal alien animal shooting our officers in California. This stuff's going on every day, and Nancy Pelosi's in Hawaii on vacation. Another tragedy, and I'm just stacking up the stories here, one after another when it comes to illegal immigration. Another story here is from Breitbart.com, and we've heard the two stories of children dying in custody, in U.S. custody after they've crossed the border. These children dying for what we've not known is why they've passed away in U.S. custody, and this is a tragedy. This is a tragedy no matter where you are. Whether a kid dies in Chicago or he dies crossing the southern border, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's sad. It's a tragedy, regardless whether they are a U.S. citizen or not. It's sad when a young child loses his or her life, no matter where it is. And so, the fact that it's a big deal that a child dies crossing the southern border, this is a big deal no matter where you are. What about all the kids in Chicago who die in their teen years from all the drug violence and the gang violence? What about those stories? That should make headlines. But nonetheless, I move on here. This 8-year-old Guatemalan boy died this past week in the custody of U.S. Customs and Border Protection, and the cause of the death has been a mystery until today, when the autopsy revealed that the young boy had the flu. So the young boy had the flu, probably went untreated for the most part, probably got to a critical stage, and sadly, this young boy died while in Border Patrol custody. But I don't blame the Customs and Border Patrol agents. I don't blame our government, because who has to answer for this? The parents. The parents of the young boy who brought him across the border illegally, allowed him to go weeks, days untreated with the flu, and he died, which is a tragedy, in the custody of the U.S. federal government. And so this is the parents that need to answer for this. This is not on the shoulders of the Border Patrol. This is on the shoulders of the parents. It's not the government's responsibility to diagnose and treat children. It's the parents' responsibility to understand that something's wrong with their child and to get them a medical attention immediately. Get them medical attention immediately. And one way you avoid tragedies like this is you don't bring children across the southern border. I mean, I would argue you don't bring anybody across the southern border illegally, but you especially don't bring young children across the southern border with these diseases and these illnesses, and they go days without food, water, and they're not treated, they're not hydrated, they have fevers up in the hundreds, and then sometimes it ends in tragedy. Absolutely unnecessary, absolutely unfortunate, and it's solely on the shoulders of the parents bringing the kids and the adults bringing the kids across our border illegally. It's a tragedy. And Nancy Pelosi's in Hawaii vacationing during all of this. The last thing I want to mention on this topic before we move on to the next segment, and we'll talk about this more later on the show, but President Trump said today, if Democrats don't get on board and fund my border wall, secure the border, I'm just going to shut down the whole southern border. I'm just going to shut down the whole southern border, and I think that's a great idea. I think this is time to go nuclear, to pull out all the stops you can, President Trump, because until you get Democrats on board, then this is all going to stay the same. The drug cartels are going to keep flourishing. Kids are going to keep dying at the border. We must get this immigration crisis fixed. The way you do it, you force the hands of the Democrats. We'll be back.
The fear of man lays a snare, but whoever trusts in the Lord is safe. My name is Abraham Hamilton III, and this is the Hamilton Minute. The boards of the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities and the National Association of Evangelicals quietly passed motions in recent months advancing an effort to support federal legislation that includes LGBTQ+ individuals as a protected class in federal civil rights legislation, in exchange for religious freedom protections. The organizations argue that this is necessary to protect religious freedom in light of current cultural trends. When did Christian organizations begin using cultural trends to define biblical truth and biological reality? Singers aren't the only ones folding in the face of the sexual deviancy political agenda.
Listen each weekday from 5 to 6 p.m. Central for the Hamilton Corner with Abraham Hamilton III, public policy analyst for the American Family Association.
This is Dr. Richard Land, president of Southern Evangelical Seminary. Welcome to Bringing Every Thought Captive. As we come to the end of 2018, in the midst of crises at home and abroad, I want to share with you wisdom from a presidential speech that was never heard. The speech JFK was going to deliver in Dallas on November the 22nd, 1963, before his life was so tragically ended by assassination. And I quote from the conclusion of that speech, quote, "Now we have the military, the scientific, and the economic strength to do whatever must be done for the preservation and promotion of freedom. That strength will never be used in pursuit of aggressive ambitions. It will always be used in pursuit of peace. It will never be used to promote provocations. It will always be used to promote the peaceful settlement of disputes. We in this country, in this generation, are, by destiny rather than choice, the watchmen on the walls of world freedom. We ask, therefore, that we may be worthy of our power and responsibility, that we may exercise our strength with wisdom and restraint, and that we may achieve in our time and for all time the ancient vision of peace on earth, goodwill toward men. That must always be our goal, and the righteousness of our cause must always underlie our strength. For as was written long ago, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman waketh, but in vain." Some have called this the greatest speech nobody ever heard. It is a great speech. You can view it online, but in this conclusion, the President makes it clear that our military strength is important, but it is our moral strength that will carry us through. And he also points out that without God's blessing, it'll all be in vain. Truly a great speech, perhaps JFK's greatest, and words to ponder as we enter 2019. For more information about Southern Evangelical Seminary, go to ses.edu. This is Richard Land.
This is Focal Point with Brian Fisher on American Family Radio.
Welcome back to Focal Point. American Family Radio is the network. Walker Wildmon is my name, guest hosting for Brian Fisher on this Friday edition of Focal Point. You know, we talked about, and by the way, before we get on to our guest that we have on the line, I want to tell you that you can watch the show on Facebook and YouTube. Either place, you can watch the show, Facebook or YouTube. You pick. Just type in Focal Point Brian Fisher. Focal Point Brian Fisher. Watch the show on Facebook or YouTube and catch some of the news articles there also. Lastly, you can go to afr.net and get the podcast. afr.net is our website for the podcast. Dan Celios, who we have on the line. Dan is host of Financial Issues, heard weekdays on American Family Radio. Dan, welcome to Focal Point.
Walker, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Glad to have you on. You know, I earlier in the week, I talked about what's going on financially in our country with the stock market, the interest rates, and how Washington just continues to print and borrow money well beyond what we can afford as a country. And I wanted to bring you on to ask you a couple of questions. You know, if I'm not mistaken, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Fed raised the interest rates maybe like 6 months ago or some odd months ago. Is that correct?
Yes.
So, and then just last week or 2 weeks ago, they announced that they were going to raise interest rates again. What is going on when it comes to the continual raising of interest rates and that effect on the stock market?
Well, the effect on the stock market. So the Fed has continued to raise rates under the new chairman, Jerome Powell. Now, look, we needed to raise rates to a certain extent, and we have been doing that because what happened, Walker, during the Obama administration, they kept the rates artificially low, and that artificially low rate basically made borrowing money by corporate America and banks pretty much free. I mean, it was free money. Mm-hmm. So the original notion was that, hey, money is free pretty much. As cheap as it's ever been, let's borrow money. And the Fed then was thinking, Janet Yellen and Ben Bernanke thinking, well, look, this is going to spur the economy. Well, it didn't work. It never did. Now, it did spur the markets because the markets love free money,
right?
As far as capital goes. So it was raising markets. Markets really liked this. It gave corporate America an opportunity to, I hate to use the word manipulate because it sounds like they were doing something illegal. They weren't.
Right.
But to financially engineer their earnings report because they had all this cheap money. They could buy back their stock. They could do other things. Well, the problem with when you make the interest rate low, the Federal Reserve, it lowers the value of the dollar. So the value of the U.S. dollar is lower. Well, I personally don't think that's a good idea. Some other economists don't as well. Larry Kudlow, someone I know, was always a proponent of a strong dollar like I was. Mm-hmm. And so strong dollar is very important. My argument 3 years ago was it's time for the Fed to start raising interest rates and get rid of the $4.2 trillion that they borrowed, again, to prop up the economy during the Obama administration, which, by the way, didn't work. And, again, another tactic that didn't work, and start getting rid of some of that. So, anyway, the Fed's come along, a new Fed chair comes on, understands this. The economy is stronger, real strength. Hiring, jobs, unemployment rate, optimism, sentiment by corporate America, all those things, all very good. Mm-hmm. So they say, look, this is a good time to raise rates. I agree. So they raise rates once. They raise rates twice. They raise rates 3 times. Now, 3 times is what the market had factored in. The 4th time came last week.
Yeah.
So the point was the problem is that they weren't unable to read how things were starting in some areas of the economy to sputter a little bit. They weren't doing as well. And it looks like, we'll find out the end of next month, but it looks like we are headed back into some deflation, which is not good for the economy. Mm-hmm. So there was no technical or fundamental reason why the Fed should have raised rates. In my opinion, the Fed raised rates because he was digging in his heels, because President Trump was criticized. And he says, well, I'm going to raise rates. In spite of that, or, for whatever reason, digging in his heels. And, unless digging in your heels is some sort of economic fundamental, the Fed, the long story, the short story is, I guess, they got it wrong.
Right.
They got it wrong big time. They should have never done it.
Right.
And I think now they look back, they realize they should have never done it. Mm-hmm. The Federal Reserve the Fed chairman thought, well, I can raise rates and just talk like I'm not going to raise rates much, if at all, in 2019. And that's going to be good enough to keep markets settled.
Right.
Well, it wasn't.
Hey, Dan.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to ask you. I want to ask you one more thing. So so from what I'm getting from you, the first 3 interest rate rises or raises were appropriate, needed to kind of cool down the economy that was apparently booming, but the last one was unnecessary from your point of view. But the next thing I want to ask you is, Washington, even under Republican control, and I know this gets under your skin just like it does mine, Republicans get control of Washington and they spend just as much money, if not more, than the Democrats when they're in control. How long can Washington, and I know I'm not a doomsday fella, I don't think the world's going to end tomorrow when it comes to a financial standpoint, but at some point, this train ride of just blowing trillions of dollars like nobody's business, this train ride's going to have to end at some point. What's your view? What are the real-life consequences of just spending and borrowing money endlessly?
Well, you're absolutely right, Walker, and you're hitting the nail on the head when it comes to spending, and it's continuing to spend. What's going to happen is, so here's the deal. We need growth. If we don't have growth, we're never going to get out of debt. Here's the problem. Growth is not enough. And President Trump right now, because Steve Mnuchin and some others have been in his ear, they believe they're acting as if the growth is all we need. See, the perfect situation is growth with cuts in spending. Now, we didn't get a budget out of the president, so we should get one soon, in the next month or so. And it's going to be interesting to say, because I don't know if you remember this, Walker, but I'm going to say 3-4 months ago, the president indicated that he was going to cut all departments of the government budget by 5%.
Yes.
And that was going to be part of his next budget. Haven't heard anything since.
Yes.
Now I know that this president has done some things that has cut spending, but for some odd reason, they're not talking about it, which is another thing getting under my skin. But because I think it would help them. But if we don't start shrinking the size of government, cutting spending, then this growth is not going to do a lick of good. And we're going to see this debt clock continuing to run up. It's one thing to say that we are bringing in more money, which is true, but we still cannot seem to get out of our way to stop spending more money than we're bringing in. And ultimately, it's going to cause a major problem in the economy that no Democratic-controlled anything or Republican-controlled anything is going to prevent.
Yeah.
We can't, think about this. Suppose you had $1,000 of credit card debt, and you were fighting to pay it off. And you turned around, and every time you turned around, your interest rate was going up. And your interest rate keeps going up and going up and going up. Now, all of a sudden, your payment that you're paying is barely paying the interest. And that $1,000 is never getting paid off.
Right.
Now, that's what's happening. The Federal Reserve has raised rates 3 times. Do you know what that's done to the Treasury Department? That just increased dramatically by hundreds of billions, not millions, hundreds of billions of dollars, what we have to pay in interest to service our $20 trillion worth of debt.
Yeah, so that's not even going to the principal when you're talking in basic terms.
You got it.
It's going to interest.
So what's happening? That's getting added. The money that we have to spend to pay the interest on the debt gets added to the debt. So
unbelievable.
Even without spending, as the Fed is raising rates, which they need to get it normalized, but it is costing the government hundreds of billions of dollars. So theoretically, in 2 years, we could be spending $1 trillion of interest alone being added to our debt to pay the interest on our debt.
So, in layman terms there, Dan, you would be, in that sense, you would be borrowing to pay interest, right?
Exactly. Well, yeah. Well, the Federal Reserve is printing money to pay their debt, right? So they're borrowing money to pay their debt. So they have to pay interest on that money that they borrow and it keeps going up.
Yeah, exactly.
So we've got to do something about spending.
Yeah.
In a dramatic way.
Yeah, and to your point, I think the executive branch, the president, unilaterally can direct some of these departments to start slashing their budgets. And you know, Dan, one of the problems that we have is, and Daniel Horowitz over at Conservative Review wrote on this today, and that is that President Trump he actually puts out a fairly conservative budget blueprint for Congress when it comes to the executive branch, but Congress gives them more money than they ask for. And so these departments are left with these billions of dollars that they don't really need to carry out their duties, and then that money, of course, ends up getting spent by these departments. And so this is a congressional problem too. Completely agree with that. Well, hey Dan, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome, Walker. I sure appreciate it. I hope you have a blessed New Year.
All right, God bless you, Dan.
Thank you.
Have a good New Year too. So you can listen to Dan Celia each weekday, 8 to 10 o'clock Central in the morning, 8 to 10 a.m. Central on American Family Radio, and then you can catch a best of, I believe, on the weekends of Dan Celia Financial Issues is the show. Appreciate Dan coming on. And, you know, I got this news story, I just kind of hinted at it, about the White House puts out their recommended budget for the federal government, for the executive branch departments. They put out their recommended budget, and Congress is giving them more than they ask for, which is a recipe for wasteful spending. And I have the chart right here. We'll get this posted up on the Facebook page. This is from conservativereview.com. Should be on the front page there. But there's this chart right here, and I'll pull it up, show it on the camera. There's this chart right here where Congress is giving these various departments, and we talked about this a little bit yesterday, giving them billions more than they even need, than they even request. And what happens to that money? Well, it's spent on wasteful projects. Because there's this thing, and there's this great, I know this is a lot of information here, folks, but that's what we're here for. We're here to provide a lot of information. There's this article back from 2013 from the Washington Post, and it's actually a very, I got to find it here. It's a very interesting article. Here's the headline, and this is still relevant today, even under a Trump administration. Here's the headline. As Congress fights over the budget, agencies go on their, quote, use it or lose it shopping spree. So what's going on here? What's the problem? Yes, Congress is out of sorts. That's a given. Yes, Congress authorizes and spends way too much money. Way too much money. Dan just talked about it. But one of the other problems is that these federal agencies who receive these funds, they're spending way too much money. So the burden is equal when it comes to responsibility on the agencies and Congress for spending, for authorizing, and for these agencies spending way too much more money. What's the point of this article? Why did I bring it up? Here's reading directly from the article. This is back in 2013, remember. This past week, the Department of Veterans Affairs bought $500,000 worth of artwork. The Department of Veterans Affairs bought $500,000 worth of artwork. Moving on here, in a single day, the Agriculture Department spent $144,000 on toner cartridges for their printers. $144,000 getting ink for their printers. What on earth are they printing in the Department of Agriculture? Moving on here. Lastly, in a single purchase, the Coast Guard spent $180,000 on cubicle furniture rehab. Now, what does that mean? I really don't know. Does that mean new furniture for the cubicles? Why use the word rehab? Anyways, Coast Guard, on the last day that they were qualified to spend this money, spent $180,000 on cubicle furniture rehab. And so this article goes on to talk about how these agencies get authorized this money that they don't need. They're basically given more money than they need, and then when time comes up for them to spend all the money, they blow it on these pet projects, the wasteful projects, just so they can get the money again next year for whatever they need it for. This stuff has to end. The executive branch, President Trump, the White House can put an end to this nonsense. This is under his purview. President Trump needs to get a hold of these federal agencies who are blowing and wasting taxpayer dollars on these dumb projects, just to put it nicely. Focal Point American Family Radio. We'll be back after the break. Here's the number to call in. 888-589-8840. 888-589-8840. We'll take your calls after the break. Focal Point American Family Radio.
Here's Twyla Brace, president of CCHF, with today's Health Freedom Minute.
2 weeks ago, Obamacare was declared unconstitutional. As Health Affairs reports, Judge O'Connor concludes that since Congress has eliminated the fine for not complying with the individual mandate, the mandate is no longer permissible under Congress's taxing power and is thus unconstitutional. Because the individual mandate is essential to and inseverable from the ACA, the judge declares the entire law is invalid. Well, score one for freedom and the plaintiffs, but the judge did not issue an injunction to stop enforcement of the law. Democrat attorneys general are moving to appeal the ruling, meaning it will go to the U.S. Supreme Court in about 18 months.
Learn more about protecting your healthcare choices. Sign up for the CCHF Weekly e-News Update at cchfreedom.org. That's cchfreedom.org.
The purpose of government is to secure God-given or inalienable rights to man.
America's premier historian, David Barton.
John Dickinson, who's also a signer of the Constitution, he said, an inalienable right is a right which God gave to you and which no inferior power has a right to take away.
Wall Builders Live captures the ideas of the Founding Fathers and then applies those ideas to the issues of today. Sunday morning at 11:30 Central on American Family Radio.
In essence, we're saying, Jesus, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I want you to follow me with your blessing. We have a choice to decide, am I going to follow Jesus, or am I going to ask Jesus to follow me?
Join Dr. David Jeremiah as he shares a special New Year's message next time on Turning Point.
5:30 a.m. and 7 p.m. Central on American Family Radio.
The Ministry of Preborn meets abortion-minded women right where they are and reaches them with the love of Christ.
We showed her love, and we accept her right where she's at. If the baby's saved by what we do here, and the mother's life is spared from the devastation of abortion, that definitely helps them in this life. But this is not all that there is. We want our clients to know about Jesus.
I got to see his heartbeat. It kind of just looked like a little butterfly in a bubble. The Lord gave me that baby, and he gave me that baby for a reason.
The Ministry of Preborn runs and leads Christian pregnancy centers all over the country, helping abortion-minded mothers to choose life for their unborn babies. To find out more about how you can help save a baby's life, go to preborn.com or dial pound 250 and say the keyword baby. That's pound 250 and say baby. All gifts are tax deductible.
American Family Radio. You're listening to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Welcome back to Focal Point American Family Radio. Is the network. Walker Wildmon here with you, sitting in for Brian Fisher. Glad to be with you. We've covered a lot of content today. We had Dan Celia on of Financial Issues talking about the Fed raising interest rates too many times, might I add. We also talked about illegal immigration, all these horror stories about illegal immigration, American citizens hurting because of our open border policy that the U.S. has. And lastly, you know, President Trump's trying to fight this, and I don't blame him. He needs to keep it up. He must continue fighting. And I agree with him. Don't open the government, Mr. President. Do not sign any kind of bill, even after the new year, with the Democrats, unless you get some border wall funding, because we have to fix this problem. We have to fix this problem. Enough kicking the can down the road, enough delaying the solutions. Time to fix the problem, time to protect American citizens, American taxpayers. And if I'm President Trump, you know, I would veto things until my hand's tired to get Congress to do something. I mean, everything they send to my desk, I would just veto it, slap it. You know, here's what President Trump needs to do. Every time Congress sends him a bill on whatever on earth, these wasteful spending bills or whatever, you know, he just needs to put a big X on the front page. I mean, just put a huge X on the front page of the bill, and then on the top-hand corner, he needs to put, give me my wall money. Give me my wall money, signed Donald Trump. Send it back to the House of Representatives, back to the Senate, and say, I'm not doing anything that Congress wants to do until I get my wall funding. Because what I'm asking for here, I'm talking as if I'm President Trump. What I'm asking for here is not complicated, perfectly legal, perfectly constitutional, and it's in the best interest of all citizens of our country. A border wall, a border security fence, whatever you want to call it, a barrier to stop this flow of drugs, people, money, and whatever else is coming across the border. We must put an end to it. And if I'm President Trump, I'm not signing a single bill. I'm not doing anything with Congress until I get my border wall funding. That would surely bring Congress to the negotiating table. The last thing I want to talk about today is, you know, I was talking about this government bureaucracy and this overspending that they do every year. I've got an article up right now at afa.net on the homepage. afa.net is our website. My article is up on the front page right now. Here's the headline of my recent article. Trump should shrink bureaucracy to save money. This needs to be President Trump's number one or number two. Number one is getting this immigration thing fixed. Number two should be to shrink bureaucracy this next year, 2019. President Trump needs to focus most of his energy on shrinking the size of the federal government. He can do this. He's actually issued an executive order in 2017 in regards to this, but that executive order really just laid the groundwork for this to be done. It didn't put any boots to the ground or any action to this, if you will, any muscle behind it. It was pure, laying out a game plan or an idea. We need action taken to shrink the size of our federal government. How can you do that, you ask? Well, I'll lay out a few ways in this article at afa.net. A couple of the ways is President Trump has to limit the agency spending on, quote, non-essential items, such as artwork. The President Trump, the commander-in-chief, the head of the entire executive branch, needs to place a cap or a limit on non-essential expenditures. Paying the salary of our soldiers is an essential, expenditure. Having tanks to fight in wars, having guns, having ammo, having office space, having computers for our federal government employees to work, that's all essential, things. But buying artwork, buying $200,000 worth of printer cartridges, I don't think that's necessary. Do you have printer cartridges right now? If so, then keep working. We're not wasting this money. So President Trump has to put an end to this. He can do it, but it's going to take an executive order. The last thing out of many that I recommend here in this article is that President Trump needs to require each of these agencies to reduce spending each year by several percentage points year over year. This will require agencies to find and eliminate wasteful spending. It will also cause agencies to reduce employee numbers. You start forcing these agencies to spend less money, they're going to be finding where the wasteful spending is, and they're going to be cutting it so that they can keep their jobs. That's what's going to happen naturally. And so President Trump must get a hold of this wasteful spending. But enough of my opinion. We're going to go to the phone lines this Friday afternoon on Focal Point. Rob in Arkansas. Rob, welcome to Focal Point.
Hey, thank you, Walker, for taking my call. Wanted to talk to you about the bureaucratic politicians that are, spending wasteful money. I'm totally in agreement with you. Does the public not remember that who is paying for this? It's coming out of your taxes money.
That's right.
That's who's paying for it. And it's funny that you say what was it you said? Pet projects. You said?
Yeah, these pet projects.
It was yeah, it's kind of ironic because I was thinking about the same thing a couple weeks ago, and it's really true. And I think the other thing that needs to happen, without a doubt, is the senators and the congressmen and everything. They need to have a reduced rate in their salary, because it's getting way out of hand. As you said, that Nancy Pelosi is spending her time in Hawaii, and she's probably got a really nice hotel that, once again, the public is paying for it.
Right.
And so I think a lot of things need to shrink, and it's going to take more than a 4-year term. I think it's going to take up to 8 years to get all this done. I really do.
Oh,
that's my feeling on it.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the call, Rob from Arkansas. Very, very good points there. And Rob's right. This is not, and I would say this is going to take longer than 8 years. Fixing Washington is going to take some decades, because it took decades to mess it up. It's going to take decades to fix it. And the last thing I'll say there, to Rob's point, is this wasteful government spending. What happens is when you allow government to grow to this size, this is a disaster waiting to happen. It's a disaster in process right now, because you have thousands and thousands of government employees, and they're not really accountable to anybody. So they're spending taxpayer dollars like nobody's business. That's why our founding fathers did not intend for the federal government to be the size that it is now. It's a disaster in process. It must be reined in. We'll go to Arkansas, stay in Arkansas, talk to Annalise. Annalise, welcome to Focal Point.
Well, thank you very much, kind sir. I have a question and a comment. Didn't President Trump spend the Christmas alone, so to speak, without his family, because they were in Florida, because he cared about the government, and then the next day went to Iraq to visit the troops? And I'm sure Nancy Pelosi's not the only one, having a vacation. Doesn't that matter or mean something to the people?
Yeah, Annalise, it should mean something, because can you imagine if all the Republicans, if Obama was in the White House by himself and then all the Republicans went on vacation while our government shut down? You're exactly right, and I'll let you go and listen on the air, but you're exactly right. The media would be all over this if Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell and all of their group went on vacation while our government was shut down and Obama was in Washington trying to fix it. The media would be blasting Republicans left and right, rightfully so. But, Maxine Waters, I actually just read a story. Maxine Waters is in the Bahamas vacationing. Nancy Pelosi's in Hawaii vacationing. And guess who's talking about it? Nobody but us. Nobody but the conservative talk radio host. Let's go down to John in Mississippi. John, welcome to Focal Point.
How you doing, Brother Walker?
Hey, John. Glad to have you on Focal Point. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, I think we got to be very careful, is that we don't burn President Trump out with all of these things. Now, it's good he should do these things, but his main thing he should just expose them, expose what the Congress is not doing, particular departments and stuff like that, because if not, you're putting too much burden on him. And the God we serve is a God of balance and a God of fairness. So we don't want to put too much on him, because I've seen leaders like him burn out because people require too much of them, and there's no balance there. So you got to be real careful, because just like that song, "What have you done for me lately?" And you forget that he's been the greatest president, basically, in the history of the United States, outside of Abraham Lincoln and maybe one other one.
Yeah, George Washington. Yeah, I completely, John, I agree with you on that, and thank you for calling in, brother from Mississippi, John. John's right. We don't need to, hit on Trump too much and criticize him too much, although sometimes it's deserved. But President Trump has done so much for our country. He's done so much. I talked about it yesterday. I talked about the military. We talked about the economy today. President Trump has been fighting for the American people since day one he's been in office. And he's been one of the greatest presidents in modern American history. In my opinion, he's surpassing Reagan. He's surpassing Reagan because he's fighting, and he's relentless. And some might disagree with me on that. That's my opinion. But John's right. We got to step back for a minute, cool off, and remember how much President Trump has done. And, to that point, when I bring up these things like, President Trump's got to get a hold of this wasteful federal government spending, I'm not bashing President Trump. I'm not beating up on President Trump. I'm simply encouraging him to get a hold of this stuff. We have to continue to encourage President Trump to continue fighting, continue getting a hold of this stuff in Washington, and always let him know that we support his presidency and what he's doing for our country. Greg in Minnesota. Greg, welcome to Focal Point.
Hi, Walker. Thanks for taking my call. Talking about money, I think it's important for people to understand how all money is created and how it's put into circulation. I never knew until about 25 years ago, but I wrote the Treasury and I asked them, and they wrote me and said that the actual creation of money always involves the extension of credit by private commercial banks. And since they changed it, the way money comes into circulation, now if we don't borrow, there isn't any money. There's no money to save, there's no money to spend or earn or tax. And, you talk about the national debt's only $20 trillion, the private debt's about $50 trillion, and the debt grows with time. But the money supply only grows with more borrowing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what we need to change, is how the money comes into circulation, because right now, the people that create all the money are running the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're exactly right, Greg. Greg from Minnesota there, appreciate you calling in, brother. A lot of problems with our financial system and too much borrowing going on. Completely agree with you. We're going to jump up to, let's see, we'll go to George in Missouri. George, welcome to Focal Point.
Hello, how you doing?
Hey, George, welcome to Focal Point. What you got on your mind?
Yeah, I think the president is doing a great job, and I call up to Washington D.C. I call up my senators and my House of Representatives, and how do the Democrats get away with all this? They just who they working for?
Mm-hmm.
They're working for we the people of the United States, and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer act like that's their money for the wall. I suggest don't give him the $5 billion. Give him all of it.
Very well said, George. George in Missouri says, let's don't settle for a measly $5 billion, as Brown says. Let's settle for $25 billion to secure our border. I completely agree there. From our friend, our listener in Missouri. Let's go down to let's go to Clifford in Texas. Clifford, welcome to Focal Point.
Oh, good to hear you. Couple of suggestions, and they're all linked together here. One, how about just freezing the budget for 4 years? That by itself would do a tremendous amount toward reducing the deficit.
Mm-hmm.
And related to that, we buy, as a federal government, probably more goods than anybody in the world. How about not buying anything, maximum extent possible, there's always exceptions, anything for the federal government that's not made in the United States? I was in the Army years ago, and I was shocked to see my boots, and the inside of the boots it had stamped made in China. No computers, nothing for the federal government, especially the military, that's not made in the United States.
Very well said, Clifford. Brilliant points there. I'll let you go, brother. But why are we buying, for our government, why are we buying products from foreign countries? Why are we buying products from China, Vietnam, other places? Let's buy our boots, let's buy our tanks, let's buy our guns, let's buy everything from the U.S. And if the prices are higher, so what? So what? Cut some wasteful spending, find some money to buy products made in America. Focal Point, American Family Radio. Glad to have you with us this week. Have a blessed new year. Stay tuned to American Family Radio, and we'll be back providing more news and commentary from a Christian biblical perspective next week. See you then.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or American Family Radio.